All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Charlotte, architectural draftsman. The music is too loud, a generic, pulsing holiday beat that vibrates through the soles of my black heels. I'm holding a glass of cheap champagne, the bubbles long dead, and I'm smiling. It's a tight, practiced smile that makes my cheeks ache. It's the company holiday party, and I am performing. Performing happiness, performing wifely pride, performing normalcy. Robert is across the room, surrounded by his team from the marketing department. He's in his element, telling a story, his hands animating the air. He's handsome. I can admit that even now, even with this cold, leaden feeling in my stomach that has been growing for weeks, he throws his head back and laughs, and the crowd around him laughs with him. He's the sun, and they are all happy little planets orbiting him. I am the distant, cold moon. A new song fades in over the speakers, the opening power chords cutting through the synth pop. Aerosmith. I don't want to miss a thing. It's cheesy, a song from a movie we saw on our third date. A lifetime ago. A shared joke. Our song, he'd called it once, his voice thick with wine and sincerity. And that's when I see it. His laugh cuts off mid-ha. His body goes still. It's a micro-expression, a flicker of something panic? Guilt? That is there and gone so fast I might have imagined it if I hadn't been watching him so closely, if my every sense hadn't been hyper-tuned to him for months. His eyes dart, just for a fraction of a second, towards a woman in his circle. Sarah, the new graphic designer. Pretty, young. Then his hand moves. A swift, furtive dip into his pocket. He pulls out his phone. His thumb swipes, the screen lights up his face for a moment, and then he turns it over, pressing it face down against his leg. He hides it. He hid his phone when our song came on. The world doesn't slow down. It crystallizes. Every sound, every laugh, the clink of glass, the saccharine lyrics, it all sharpens to a painful, exquisite point. That leaden weight in my gut liquefies into a searing flood of knowing. This isn't paranoia. This isn't my anxiety conjuring ghosts. This is it. The final, undeniable piece of evidence I didn't even know I was waiting for. The champagne flute is cold in my hand. I look down at it, at the pale gold liquid, and I see my entire marriage reflected in its stagnant surface. The late nights at the office. The texts that went unanswered. The emotional distance I'd chalked up to stress. The way he'd started talking about Sarah's ideas, Sarah's talent, Sarah's everything, with a light in his eyes I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I am an architectural draftsman. I build worlds from lines and angles. I understand structure, foundation, load-bearing walls. And in this single, silent, horrifyingly mundane gesture, a man hiding his phone, I feel the entire structure of my life crack down the middle with a sound only I can hear. The foundation we built over 11 years crumbles into dust. The smile is gone from my face. I don't have the energy to hold it up anymore. I set the glass down on a passing waiter's tray with a quiet, definitive click. I don't look at Robert. I can't. I turn and I walk. My heels don't click on the polished concrete floor. I move as if through water, the party noise fading to a dull roar in my ears. I retrieve my coat from the check. My movements automatic, precise. The cold Colorado air hits my face like a slap as I push open the heavy door. It's clean. It's bracing. It's real. I don't cry. I sit in the driver's seat of my car, my hands resting on the cold steering wheel, and I stare at the festive lights twinkling in the office building windows. I see the ghost of my own reflection in the windshield, a 37-year-old woman whose life just fractured. But in that ghost's eyes, there isn't hysteria. There's a terrifying granite calm. The plans have changed. The blueprint is null and void. I start the car, the engine purrs to life. And I drive away from the party, from my husband, from the woman I was an hour ago. I don't know where I'm going. But I know, with a certainty that feels like the first true thing I've known in a long time, that I will never, ever be the same. The house was a tomb. A beautifully designed, mid-century modern tomb that Robert and I had painstakingly restored over 7 of our 11 years. I'd drawn the plans myself. I knew every load-bearing wall, every original hardwood plank we'd salvaged, every sightline from every window that framed the Colorado foothills. Now, the silence within its walls was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. I hadn't slept. I'd sat in the living room all night, in the dark, in the Eames chair he'd bought me for my 30th birthday. I watched the sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows shift from inky black to bruised purple to a pale, sickly gray. My body was rigid, humming with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and despair. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen, and there was no audience left. I heard his key in the lock at just past 7. The sound was so normal, so utterly mundane, that it felt like a violation. The door clicked open and shut. His footsteps were heavy in the hallway, slightly unsteady. He was hungover. He'd probably closed down the party after I left. He walked into the living room, shrugging off his coat. He saw me and jumped, a hand flying to his chest. "Jesus, Char, you scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark?" His voice was gravelly. He flicked on a lamp, and the warm light felt like an assault. "Where did you go last night?" he asked, dropping his coat over the back of the sofa. "I looked for you. Sarah said she saw you leave looking upset." "Everything okay?" He said her name so casually. Sarah said, "It was a knife, twisted." I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the view, on the stark, winter-bare trees against the gray sky. "I want you to tell me about Sarah," I said. My voice was flat, a stranger's voice. The air in the room changed. It became charged, brittle. I could feel his confusion, his sudden, sharp alertness. Sarah? What about her?" "She's just a colleague. Did she say something to you?" He tried for a light, amused tone. It fell flat. "I want you to tell me why you felt the need to hide your phone from me when our songs came on last night." I finally turned my head to look at him. "Look at me, Robert, and tell me why." His face went through a series of micro-adjustments. Confusion, calculation, denial. I watched the architecture of his lies being drafted in real time behind his eyes. "What? I didn't hide my phone?" "That's crazy. My battery was low." "I was just checking it," he forced a laugh. "You serious right now? You're interrogating me because of a song?" I didn't blink. "It's not the song. It's the 9 months of you pulling away. It's the constant texting that you think I don't notice. It's the way your face lights up when you talk about her brilliant campaigns and then goes blank when I talk about my day. It's you working late 3 nights a week for a quarter that hasn't been that busy in years." I listed the evidence, my voice still that terrifying, emotionless monotone. I was presenting my case. The phone was just the confirmation. "So, I'll ask you one more time. Tell me about Sarah." The facade crumbled. The anger he'd been mustering as a defense evaporated, replaced by a panicked guilt that was so much worse. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "It's not what you think," he mumbled into his palms. "Don't," I cut him off, my voice gaining a sliver of heat. "Don't insult us both with that cliché. Just say it." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. It's an emotional thing, Charlotte. It just happened. We talk. We connect. It's not physical, I swear to God. It's just, she gets me." The pressure at work, everything, his words were bullets, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. "She gets me. After 11 years, a shared home, a shared life, I no longer got him." "How long?" The question was ash in my mouth. "A few months." He looked down at his hands. "I was going to end it. I swear. I never wanted to hurt you." The classic lines of a man who got caught, not a man who was repentant. The anger I'd been holding back all night finally ignited. It was a cold, clean fire. "Get out," I said. He stared at me, stunned. "What? Get out?" I stood up. My legs were weak, but I locked my knees. "I don't care where you go. A hotel, her place, I don't care. But you don't get to sit in the home I designed, on the furniture I picked out, and tell me another woman gets you. You don't get to do that. Get out. Charlotte, please, let's talk about this." He started, rising to his feet, his hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "There is nothing to talk about," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "You broke it. There is no us's to talk about. Now, leave before I say things that can never be taken back." He must have seen the finality in my eyes. The cold, uncompromising truth. He looked like a little boy, lost and frightened. He nodded slowly, picked up his coat, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now. It was mine. The house was mine. The ruin was mine. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the emptiness. Then, my eyes fell on the hardwood floors, the beautiful, custom-stained oak floors he had been so proud of installing himself. Our first big project together in this house. I walked to the garage and got my orbital sander and a pack of coarse grit pads. I dragged the machine into the center of the living room. I didn't move the furniture. I plugged it in. The whirring scream of the sander was the only sound in the world. It was violent, abrasive, and utterly consuming. I pressed down, guiding the machine over the smooth, finished surface. Sawdust filled the air, a fine, golden cloud that smelled of destruction. I was erasing him, sanding away the surface he had touched, the finish he had applied. With every pass, I was dismantling the life we built, plank by plank. The vibration traveled up my arms, rattling my bones, numbing my brain. It was the only thing I could feel, and for that, I was grateful. It was pain I could control. The sander had been catharsis. The raw, exposed planks of the living room floor were a testament to a pain that was at least active, a wound I had some agency in inflicting. But the silence that followed was a different beast. It was a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed the paperwork. A divorce, I quickly learned, is not an emotional event. It is an administrative one. It is a relentless onslaught of forms, petitions, financial affidavits, and discovery requests. It is a process that systematically reduces 11 years of a shared life into columns of assets and liabilities, into a parenting plan for children we didn't have, into a negotiation over a cheese board and a set of wedding china we never used. Robert's lawyer, a man with a voice so smooth and devoid of empathy it could have been AI-generated, sent the first volley. A thick manila envelope appeared in my mailbox. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I carried it inside and dropped it on the dining table, the same table where we'd hosted Thanksgiving, where we'd shared countless bottles of wine and dreams about the future. Now, it was a legal battleground. I left it there for 2 days. It sat like a malevolent centerpiece, a dark stain on the pale wood. I'd walk around it, my skin prickling. It held the power to make the abstract horror of Robert's betrayal brutally, legally concrete. Opening it would be the point of no return. On the third day, I made a pot of coffee I didn't drink, sat down, and slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife. The sound was final. The language was sterile, alien. Petitioner, respondent. Dissolution of marriage. My eyes scanned the lines, but my brain refused to process the words. It was like reading a technical manual for a machine that was breaking my heart. Then I saw it. Page 4, Section 7B, Division of Marital Property. Our home. The home. It was listed there between our joint savings account and his 401k. Its value, estimated by some faceless appraiser, was just a number. It had no line for the hundreds of hours I'd spent on the designs, for the way the light hit the hallway at 4 p.m. in the winter, for the memory of us painting the bedroom and ending up with more paint on each other than on the walls. It was just an asset, a thing to be divided. A sound escaped me, a half sob, half gasp. I pushed away from the table so violently my chair screeched against the floor I'd scarred. I couldn't do this. I couldn't sit in this silent, empty house and commodify my own life. I needed noise. I needed movement. I needed to be anywhere but here. I drove aimlessly, my hands tight on the wheel, the Colorado landscape blurring past my windows. Or I wasn't going anywhere. I was just fleeing the envelope on the table. I found myself in the parking lot of a generic, sprawling pet supply store. I didn't need anything, but it was a place of life, of mundane normalcy. I went inside. The store was brightly lit and smelled of kibble and pine shavings. I wandered the aisles, my fingers trailing over bags of dog food, brightly colored toys, absurdly tiny outfits for creatures that would undoubtedly hate them. I stopped in front of a wall of fish tanks. Neon tetras darted through plastic castles. A betta fish flared its magnificent, languid fins in a solitary cup. I stood there for 10 minutes, just watching it breathe. Its world was so small, so simple. I envied it. My feet carried me further into the small animal section. And that's when I heard it. A tiny, frantic scratching. I looked down. In a glass enclosure, surrounded by wood chips and a silent, still wheel, was a single, black and white rabbit. It was digging at the corner of its tank, over and over again, a compulsive, hopeless motion. Its sides were heaving. It wasn't playing. It was panicking. I looked around for a store employee, but the aisle was empty. It was just me and the rabbit. I knelt down. Its eyes were wide, dark pools of pure terror. It was trapped. It was alone. It was digging for a freedom it would never find in this glass box. I saw myself. I was that rabbit. Trapped in the glass box of my marriage's corpse, scratching frantically at the walls of legal documents and painful memories, my own sides heaving with silent sobs in the dark. The parallel was so absurd, so devastatingly perfect, that it broke the dam inside me. Tears I hadn't been able to cry for Robert, for myself, for our dead future, now came for this terrified creature. They streamed down my face, hot and silent there in the pet store aisle. I didn't wipe them away. I just knelt on the linoleum floor and cried for the rabbit. For me, an employee, a young kid with a name tag that read Tyler, finally came around the corner. "Whoa, ma'am, are you okay?" I looked up, my vision blurred. I pointed a shaky finger at the enclosure. He's scared," I managed to choke out, my voice thick with tears. Tyler peered in. "Oh, yeah. Pip. He's been like that since his buddy got adopted last week. Doesn't like being alone. Doesn't like being alone." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just grieving Robert. I was terrified of the aloneness that stretched out before me, vast and empty. The quiet house, the empty side of the bed, the solitary meals. This rabbit was a mirror held up to my soul, reflecting my own raw, scratching panic. I stood up, wiping my face with the back of my sleeve. I took a deep, ragged breath. The administrative nightmare was still on my table. The heartbreak was still in my chest. But in this ridiculous fluorescent-lit moment, a new impulse, clear and fierce, overrode everything else. I looked at Tyler, my decision solidifying with every second. "What does he need?" I asked, my voice stronger now. "A cage? Food? Everything. I'll take him. I'm taking him home." An hour later, I walked out of that store. I was no longer just a woman getting a divorce. I was a woman carrying a large cardboard box that contained a terrified rabbit, a bag of Timothy hay, and a water bottle that allegedly didn't leak. The box trembled against my chest. I drove home, the box on the passenger seat. The occasional frantic scratch was the only sound. I talked to him the whole way. "It's okay," I murmured. "I'm scared too, but the box is bigger. I promise. The box is so much bigger." I set up the new cage in the living room, next to the sanded floor. I lifted Pip, I'd already named him, into his new home. He froze for a moment, nose twitching violently. Then, tentatively, he hopped once, then twice. He sniffed at a pile of hay. He didn't scratch at the corners. I sat on the floor beside the cage, pulling my knees to my chest. I watched him. The manila envelope was still on the table. I looked from it to the rabbit. One was a monument to everything that was ending. The other was a tiny, trembling promise of something new, something that needed me. The silence in the house was still there. But it was no longer empty. It was filled with the soft, rustling sound of a creature beginning to breathe easy. And for the first time since the company party, I felt my own shoulders drop, just a fraction. I had to be brave, because now something else was depending on me not to be the rabbit in the glass box. Pip's presence was a quiet revolution. The house was no longer just a monument to my failed marriage. It was now also the kingdom of a nervous, black and white rabbit. His needs were simple, immediate, and blessedly distracting. The rustle of hay, the click of the water bottle, the soft thump of his feet, these small sounds punctuated the silence, giving it a new rhythm, a purpose. But the paperwork was a specter that wouldn't be banished by bunny pellets. Robert's lawyer's requests became more intrusive, demanding appraisals of every asset, including the house I had designed. The thought of a stranger walking through these rooms, assigning a dollar value to the poured concrete fireplace I'd sketched on a napkin, to the custom cabinets that fit the space perfectly because I'd measured it 100 times, felt like a profound violation. I couldn't stop the process, but I could reclaim the space on my own terms. I decided to finally finish the office nook. A small, oddly shaped alcove off the living room that had always been a dumping ground for boxes and I'll get to it later projects. Robert had never seen the point. It's just a dead space, Char, he'd said. Now, its unfinished state felt like a metaphor for our entire relationship. I moved Pip's cage into the alcove so he could watch me work without getting dust in his twitchy nose. I pulled out my old drafting supplies, the T-square, the rolls of vellum, the lead holders I hadn't touched since going fully digital. There was a comfort in their physicality, their weight and smell of graphite and paper. But as I unrolled a fresh sheet of vellum, intending to sketch some simple shelving, my hand froze. My eyes were drawn, against my will, to a flat file cabinet in the corner, and a P point. The bottom drawer held the archives. The ghosts. My fingers, clumsy and cold, found the handle and pulled. There they were, dozens of rolled plans, tied with crisp white ribbon. Our history in blue lines and elevations. I pulled out the first one. Our first apartment, a tiny one-bedroom we were so proud of. I unrolled it, the paper crackling, the familiar scent of blueprint ink filling the air. There, in the corner, were our initials, hidden in the design of the bathroom tile, C+R. I dropped it like it had burned me. I pulled out another. The first draft of this very house. The margins were filled with our notes in different colored pencils. Robert's messy scrawl, bigger closet here. My neater print, waste of structural space. Use underbed storage. Next to it, I'd drawn a little frowny face. He'd countered with a heart. We were in these lines. Our hopes, our jokes, our shared dream of a future. Every measurement was a negotiation, every window placement a conversation. I had drafted the structure, but we had built the home together. Or so I'd thought. The ache was physical, a hollowing out of my chest. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the paper artifacts of our life. Pip stopped chewing his hay and watched me, his nose a frantic metronome. I thought the anger and the tears had purged me. I was wrong. This was a deeper, more insidious grief. It was for the loss of the dream itself, the loss of the partner I believed was my co-architect. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had abandoned the project of us, leaving me alone in a half-built life. Tears came again, but they were silent this time. They dripped onto a plan for the garden we never planted, smudging the lines of the perennial beds. I was marooned in a sea of paper promises, all of them broken. I don't know how long I sat there. But eventually, my tears slowed. My breathing evened out. I looked at the rolls of paper, not as monuments to what was lost, but as just paper. Lines on a page. A design that was fundamentally flawed because one of the architects had a weak foundation. Pip thumped his foot, a sudden, startling sound in the quiet. It was a demand to return to the present. To now. I looked from the old, painful blueprints to the blank sheet of vellum on my desk. The past was a recorded, immutable fact. But the future was a blank page. A new, fierce determination seized me. I stood up, my joints protesting. I gathered the old plans, every last one of them. I didn't look at them. I carried them out to the large metal trash bin in the garage. I dropped them in. The sound was a dull, final thud. I went back inside, my hands empty. I walked over to the drafting table and looked at the pristine, empty vellum. Then I looked at the alcove. My alcove. Not a dead space. A opportunity. I picked up my lead holder. The grip felt familiar, right? I didn't start with the shelving. I started by sketching Pip's cage, right where it was. I drew him in, a little bunny-shaped smudge of graphite. I made him part of the blueprint. Then I began to draw for me. Not for a client, not for a husband, and Ed, for a husband. For me. I designed a reading nook with a window seat that would catch the afternoon sun. I designed floating shelves for my photography books. I designed a hidden cabinet for my camera gear. The lines were clean, sure. They were mine. The ghost of the old blueprint hadn't vanished. It was a part of the structure, the way old foundations are buried under new constructions. But I was no longer its prisoner. I was its repurposer. I worked for hours, lost in the flow of creation. When I finally stepped back, my neck was sore, my fingers were smudged black, and my stomach was growling. The sun had set. I turned on the lamp, and the new drawing glowed under the light. It was better than the old plans. It was more honest. It was built for one, with space for a rabbit. It was, for the first time, entirely and authentically mine. The past was in the trash. The future was on the drawing board. And the present smelled like Timothy hay and graphite, which, I decided, was a smell I could learn to love. The new blueprint for the alcove was taped to the wall, a promise of a future self. Pip was thriving, his initial terror replaced by a regal ownership of his domain. He would hop around the living room, nudging my toes with his cool, damp nose when he felt his parsley ration was overdue. We had a routine. It was small, it was quiet, but it was mine. And then the first legal bill arrived. It was slipped under the door by a process server on a Tuesday morning. A crisp, white envelope from my attorney's office. I opened it with a sense of grim duty. The single page inside wasn't a legal motion, it was an invoice. I scanned the itemized list: conference with client re, marital asset valuation, 1 hours. Review of respondents' financial disclosures, 2 hours. Drafting correspondence to opposing counsel, 0 hours. My eyes dropped to the bottom. The total due was a number so obscenely high, so violently out of proportion with the value of the hours listed, that the breath left my body. It was more than my first car. It was a vacation to Bali. It was a down payment on a studio apartment. It was for a few hours of a stranger's time to help me dismantle my life. A cold, sharp panic, far more acute than the grief, began to prickle at the base of my skull. This was just the beginning. This number would multiply again and again until the financial hemorrhage rivaled the emotional one. I was paying a professional to help me lose half of everything I owned. The brutal, transactional absurdity of it hit me like a physical blow. I slid down the wall onto the floor, the invoice fluttering from my hand. Pip hopped over, curious, and sniffed at the paper. I didn't shoo him away. What did it matter? Let him eat it. Let him turn it into something useful. The calm I had meticulously built over the past few weeks shattered. The carefully constructed walls of my new, small life crumbled, and the full, terrifying reality of my situation came flooding in. I was alone. I was staring down the barrel of a financial abyss. The house, my sanctuary, my creation, was now a liability, a treasure to be fought over and sold to pay for the privilege of having it taken from me. My career felt fragile, a thread that could snap at any moment. The future wasn't a blank page, it was a void, and I was falling into it. The tears didn't come slowly this time. They were a torrent, racking sobs that tore from my throat, raw and ugly. I cried for the money. I cried for the house. I cried for the years wasted. I cried for the profound, crushing loneliness that this bill represented. I was paying to be alone. I cried until my head throbbed and my stomach ached. I cried until I was hollowed out, a shell of a person sitting on the cold, sanded floor of a home that was no longer hers. The silence of the house, once a comfort, was now a mockery. It was the silence of emptiness, of failure. The sun set, the room plunged into darkness. I didn't move to turn on a light. I just sat there in the deepening gloom, consumed by a despair so complete it felt like a final destination. This was it. The bottom. The place the grief had been trying to drag me to all along. And then, through the numb, static haze in my brain, a memory surfaced. Not a happy one, a bizarre one. From the list of randomized traits, the one I'd dismissed as nonsensical, expression of grief, breakdancing at 3 a.m. A choked, watery sound escaped me. It was half a sob, half a laugh. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. Breakdancing? I was a 37-year-old architectural draftsman who expressed emotion by sanding floors and designing bookshelves. I didn't breakdance. I didn't even know how to spinning top. But the absurdity of it was a pinprick of light in the overwhelming dark. It was so stupid, so utterly contrary to the profound tragedy I was wallowing in, that it created a cognitive dissonance I couldn't ignore. The universe, in its infinite, weird sense of humor, had assigned me this as a coping mechanism. Fine, I thought, a wild, hysterical edge to my internal monologue. You want breakdancing? I'll give you breakdancing. I pushed myself up from the floor. My body felt heavy, leaden. I stumbled to my laptop, my face streaked with tears and probably snot. I opened a video streaming site. I typed in beginner breakdancing tutorial. The first result was a man named Spinny Ray who wore neon leg warmers and spoke with terrifying enthusiasm. All right, B-boys and B-girls. Let's start with the 6th step. Idea? It's the foundation of your footwork. No, your other left. Just kidding, let's go. It was 2058 a.m. I dragged the coffee table out of the way, pushing it against the sofa. I looked at Pip. He was watching me with deep suspicion. Don't judge me, I whispered hoarsely. Spinny Ray was frozen on the screen, one hand planted on the ground, his legs splayed in a position that defied both physics and good sense. I pressed play. The first attempt was a disaster. I tripped over my own feet and landed hard on my hip. The second was worse. The third was pathetic, and it seemed to have pressed words over to a fast and tracks that using with pressed rate. But on the 4th try, something shifted. I wasn't trying to be good. I wasn't trying to be anything. I was just following the stupid, complicated steps, focusing all my mental energy on not falling over, on which foot went where. The all-consuming panic and despair were forced to make room for the sheer physical challenge of it. I was sweating. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. I messed up again, collapsing into a heap on the floor. But this time, I was laughing. A real, genuine, breathless laugh. I sounded insane. A recently divorced woman, alone in a dark house, laughing maniacally on the floor at 3010 a.m., while a rabbit looked on in utter bewilderment. I wasn't graceful. I wasn't a B-girl. I was a mess. But for those few minutes, I wasn't thinking about the bill. I wasn't thinking about Robert. I wasn't thinking about the void. I was only thinking about the next step. The next move. I finally stopped, chest heaving, lying on my back on the floor, staring up at the dark ceiling. The weight was still there. The problems hadn't magically vanished. But they felt manageable, smaller. I had faced the absolute worst, the total emotional bankruptcy, and I had responded not by dying, but by attempting to do a pathetic, flailing 6th step. It was the most empowering failure of my life. I had hit the bottom. And I had discovered, to my utter astonishment, that the bottom had a sprung wooden floor. It wasn't a void, it was a dance studio. The only way out was to move. I sat up, wiping the sweat from my forehead. I looked over at the invoice, still lying where Pip had left it. I picked it up. It was still a terrifying number. But it was just a number. It wasn't a verdict on my life. I took a deep breath. The air felt different, and what times to expend in processes ardia? Lighter. I had cried my last tear for the life I'd lost. The future was still unknown, but it was no longer a void. It was a dance I hadn't learned yet. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of curiosity to hear the music. The absurdity of my 3 a.m. breakdancing session left a strange afterglow. The crushing weight of despair had been, if not lifted, then at least redistributed. The problems were still there. The legal bills, the dividing assets, the ghost of Robert in the blueprints. But they no longer felt like a tidal wave about to drown me. They felt like a steep but climbable mountain, and I needed to start climbing. The randomized parameter assigned to me floated back into my mind. Vid my CEG, my CEG. Landscape photography. It was as random as the breakdancing, but it felt different. Not a reaction to grief, but a potential path away from it. A thing to build, not just a feeling to expel. I'd always appreciated a well-composed photo, but my tool was a pencil, a T-square, a CAD program. I built worlds from lines. Capturing a pre-existing world through a lens felt passive, almost frivolous. But the idea took root. It was a new language, a new way of seeing. And right now, my old way of seeing through the lens of my failed marriage was causing me nothing but pain. I found my old camera, a digital Sur I'd bought years ago for documenting architectural sites and never truly mastered. It sat in its bag, a complex puzzle of buttons and dials. I took it out, its weight unfamiliar in my hands. Pip hopped over and sniffed the lens cap, unimpressed. I spent an afternoon reading the manual, watching tutorials online. Aperture, ISO, shutter speed. It was another technical language, but this one was about light and shadow, not stress loads and elevations. It was strangely soothing. My brain, trained for precision, latched onto the mechanics of it. This was a problem I could solve. I could learn this. The next morning, I decided to go on my first photo walk. The term felt pretentious, so I didn't say it out loud. I was just going for a walk. With a camera, I drove to a nearby state park, one with an easy, looping trail that followed a creek. I'd been here with Robert a dozen times. We'd hike quickly, talking about work, about future plans, our eyes on the destination, not the journey. We'd never once stopped just to look. I parked the car, slung the camera strap around my neck, and felt a surge of self-consciousness. I was a fraud, a divorcee playing at being Ansel Adams. Who did I think I was? I forced myself to walk onto the trail. The air was crisp, clean, scented of pine and damp earth. For the first 10 minutes, I saw nothing. My mind was a whirl of legal strategy and self-doubt. The camera was a dead weight against my chest. Then, I made myself stop. I stood still on the path and forced myself to breathe. Look, I commanded myself. Just look. I saw the way the morning sun filtered through the canopy of aspens, creating shifting patterns of light and dark on the forest floor. I saw the intricate frost-like texture of lichen on a fallen log. I saw the way the creek water curled around a mossy stone, a perfect swirling vortex of clear water. My architect's eye, trained to see form and function, began to engage, but in a new way. I wasn't assessing the structural integrity of a tree or the erosion patterns of the bank. I was seeing beauty. Pure, useless, magnificent beauty. It existed regardless of my divorce, my bills, my broken heart. The world was still breathtakingly beautiful, and it didn't need my permission to be so. I raised the camera. I fumbled with the dials, trying to remember the relationship between aperture and depth of field. My first shot was of the light through the trees. I chimped at the screen immediately. It was, okay, a blurry. The light was blown out. It wasn't what I saw. Instead of frustration, I felt a spark of challenge. I adjusted the settings. I leaned against a tree to steady myself. I took another. Better. I moved my position, getting lower to the ground, seeing the world from the perspective of the lichen. I took another. Click. Whir, click. The sound was satisfying. It was a tiny, definitive action. I was capturing a moment, framing it, claiming it as my own. I wasn't a passive victim of my circumstances anymore. I was an active participant in finding beauty. However small, it was a rebellion. I lost track of time. I spent 45 minutes photographing a single spiderweb, strung between two branches, beaded with morning dew like a necklace of diamonds. I'd never noticed the delicate architecture of a web before, the incredible strength and precision of it. A home built on air. A thought struck me, so clear it was like a bell ringing in the quiet forest. I am rebuilding too. This wasn't just about taking pretty pictures. This was about retraining my eye. For 11 years, my vision had been shared, compromised, filtered through the lens of us. Now, it was mine alone. What did I find beautiful? What did I want to focus on? The camera was forcing me to answer those questions, one click at a time. I didn't take any grand, sweeping landscapes that day. My photos were small, intimate details. The fractal pattern of a frozen puddle. The gnarled, wise bark of an ancient pine. The perfect, heart-shaped hole in a leaf. As I walked back to the car, the camera felt lighter. It felt like a part of me. My fingers knew the buttons by touch now. My eye was already seeking out the next composition, the next little piece of world to claim. When I got home, I uploaded the photos to my computer. I scrolled through them, my critical eye assessing the technical flaws. The composition was off here, the focus was soft there. But for once, my inner critic was quieted by a stronger feeling, pride. I had made these. I had chosen these moments. They were flawed, but they were authentically, entirely mine. I printed my favorite one, the spider web. I tacked it to the wall next to the blueprint for my alcove. 2 new designs, 2 new structures. One for my outer world, one for my inner world. The first line had been drawn, not in anger, not in grief, but in light. And it was beautiful. The spiderweb photo, tacked to my wall, became a talisman. It was proof. Proof that I could see beauty, that I could create something from that seeing, that I could find moments of grace even in the wreckage. But a single moment does not make a life. A single photo does not build a new identity. I had taken the first step, but the path ahead was long and uncertain. I needed to walk it every day. The randomized trait landscape photography was no longer a random assignment. It was becoming a lifeline. But it needed structure. It needed to become a ritual, not a whim. This was where the other randomized elements began to weave together. My expression of grief had been sanding floors and breakdancing. My path forward was behind a lens. And my chance encounter was tied to a pet. My pet. Pip needed walks. Not the kind a dog needed, but he enjoyed hopping around on the grass, exploring the safety of his harness and leash. It was a comical sight, a serious woman being led by a cautious rabbit, but it got us outside. The idea formed slowly, then all at once. My photo walks didn't have to be solitary drives to a park. They could be hikes. With Pip, I could combine it all. The need for movement, the practice of my new skill, the care for this creature who depended on me. A trifecta of purpose. I bought a specialized backpack for small animals, one with a mesh dome so Pip could see out. I stocked it with his water, parsley, and a small first aid kit I hoped I'd never need. I slung my camera over my shoulder. We looked ridiculous. I didn't care. Our first real hike was to a nearby trail I'd always bypassed for being too short, too simple. The path was wide and wound through a meadow before ascending gently to a rocky overlook. It was a beginner's trail. Fitting. Pip, nestled in his backpack, was a perfect gentleman. His nose twitched at the new smells, his ears swiveling like radar dishes at every bird call. He was my silent, furry co-pilot. I started taking pictures. Not with the frantic energy of my first outing, but with a slower, more deliberate intention. I stopped because the light on a patch of wildflowers was perfect. I knelt because I saw the way a beetle was navigating a tiny universe on a leaf. Pip would wait, munching on a piece of parsley I'd handed him through the mesh, his presence a quiet, grounding constant. The ritual began to take shape. Every Saturday morning, without fail, we would go. The location changed, a lakeside path, a forest preserve, a botanical garden, but the routine was sacred. The packing of the bag, the drive, the careful fitting of Pip's harness, the first step onto the trail. It was on these hikes that the mental shift truly solidified. The camera forced me out of my own head. To get a good shot, you have to be present. You have to watch the light, anticipate the moment, be aware of your composition. There was no room to ruminate on legal documents or Robert's betrayal when I was trying to capture a hummingbird frozen in midair, its wings a blur against the vivid red of a feeder. I began to learn the language of the landscape. I learned that the best light was the golden hour, just after sunrise or before sunset. I learned that after a rain, the colors were deeper, more saturated. I learned to see the world not as a collection of things, but as an interplay of light, shadow, texture, and line. It was, I realized, not so different from architectural drafting. I was just using nature's blueprint instead of my own. The photos improved. My technical skills grew. But more importantly, the act itself became meditative. The rhythmic crunch of my boots on the gravel, the steady in and out of my breath, the soft rustling of Pip in his pack, it was a mantra. With every step, I was walking away from the woman I had been. With every click of the shutter, I was building a new portfolio for a new life. One Saturday, we hiked to the top of the overlook. It was a clear day, and you could see for miles across the Colorado foothills the rock formations striated with colors, the evergreen forests a dark green blanket. I let Pip out onto a flat rock, holding his leash tightly. He sat there, regal, his fur ruffled by the wind, surveying his kingdom. I raised my camera, but I didn't take a picture of the vast landscape. I focused on him, a small, black and white rabbit against the immense, majestic backdrop of the world. The contrast was hilarious and profound. He was so small. I was so small. Our problems were so small in the face of this ancient, enduring beauty. I took the shot. Later, when I uploaded it to my computer, I saw it was technically one of my best. The focus was sharp on Pip, the background a beautiful, creamy bokeh of blues and greens. But it was more than that. It was a thesis statement for my new life. It was about finding your place, your significance, not by dominating the landscape, but by existing within it, by appreciating its scale and your own small, perfect part in it. The ritual was no longer just about taking pictures. It was about perspective. It was my weekly reminder that the world was vast and beautiful, and that my pain, while real, was not the entire story. There were trails to hike, light to chase, and a rabbit who needed his parsley. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The ritual of the hikes, the constant companionship of Pip, the relentless practice with my camera, it all coalesced into a new kind of fluency. The grief was no longer a gaping hole. It was a scar, a part of my topography I had learned to navigate. The divorce proceedings grinded on, a dull, bureaucratic hum in the background of my life, but it had lost its power to eviscerate me. I was too busy building. My photography had evolved from a desperate distraction into a disciplined craft. I'd long since moved off the automatic settings. I spoke the language of f-stops and shutter speeds fluently. I'd invested in a better lens, a beautiful piece of glass that felt like an extension of my own eye. The world wasn't just something I saw anymore. It was a series of potential compositions, a play of light waiting for my command. I'd started a website, a simple, clean portfolio of my best work. I called it Drawn Light, a nod to my two vocations. I didn't tell anyone about it. It wasn't for an audience. It was, for me, a digital gallery of my re-education, of my re-enchantment with the world. The photos were no longer just pretty pictures. They were stories. The story of a dewdrop's brief, brilliant life. The story of granite's slow surrender to wind and water. The story of a rabbit's quiet curiosity. One evening, I was uploading my latest batch, a series from a hike in a misty canyon. The shots were moody and dramatic, the fog softening the hard edges of the rocks, creating a world of mystery and subtle gradients of gray. As I tagged them, an ad popped up in the sidebar. Boulder County Annual Amateur Photography Showcase, submissions open. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Amateur. The word felt like a perfect fit and a complete misnomer. I was an amateur in the literal sense. I did it for the love of it. But the work itself no longer felt amateur. It felt considered, all tough considered. Intentional. A bolt of fear, sharp and familiar, shot through me. Submitting my work meant judgment. It meant inviting the outside world into my private sanctuary of healing. It meant the potential for rejection, for someone to look at my hard-won piece and say, "Not good enough." I almost closed the tab. The fear was a comfortable old blanket. I could wrap myself in it and stay safe, hidden in my alcove with Pip. But then I looked at the photo on my screen. It was a shot of Pip himself, perched on a moss-covered log in that misty canyon, his dark eyes bright and intelligent against the soft focus background. He looked like a creature from a fairy tale, wise and unafraid. I had captured that. I had seen that moment and frozen it in time. I had faced the utter devastation of my marriage. I had faced down financial ruin. I had sobbed on the floor and attempted to break dance at 3 a.m. Was I really going to be afraid of a county fair photography show? The fear was still there, but it was now accompanied by a new, stubborn sensation, defiance. A refusal to let the fear win anymore. "Screw it," I said aloud. Pip, snoozing in his cage, twitched an ear. I selected 5 photographs. Not the safest ones, not the most technically perfect postcard shots. I chose the ones that felt the most like me. The spider web. Pip in the mist. A macro shot of the lichen that looked like a miniature forest. A dramatic wide angle of a lightning strike over the plains I'd captured from my porch one night. And one of my favorite, the image of Pip on the overlook, small and mighty against the vast world. Filled out the form. I typed in my name, Charlotte O'Brien, just my name, not Robert's last name, not us, me. I typed in the title for the overlook photo, the co-architect. I hit submit. The screen refreshed to a cheerful, "Thank you for your submission" message. The fear didn't vanish. It sat in my stomach like a stone. But underneath it was a current of pure, unadulterated excitement. I had done it. I had put a piece of my new self out into the world. Weeks passed. I almost forgot about it, throwing myself into a new project, designing a series of greeting cards featuring my photos. It was another silly, frivolous idea that made me irrationally happy. Then, the email arrived. The sender was Boulder County Arts Council. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the polite rejection. "Thank you for your interest, but..." I opened it. "Dear Mrs. O'Brien," it began. "The jurors of the Boulder County Annual Amateur Photography Showcase were delighted by your submissions. We are pleased to inform you that all 5 of your photographs have been accepted for exhibition." I read it again, and again. All 5. The email continued. Furthermore, the piece titled "The Co-Architects" has been selected by unanimous decision as the recipient of this year's Viewer's Choice Award. I made a sound. I didn't know what it was. A gasp, a laugh, a sob of pure shock. Pip startled awake and thumped his foot in alarm. I wasn't an amateur. Not anymore. The outside world, in the form of 3 anonymous jurors, had looked at the pieces of my soul I'd offered up and had not only accepted them but had crowned them. They'd seen the same thing I felt when I took that picture, a story of resilience, of finding one's place. The night of the exhibition opening, I dressed with care. I didn't put on a costume. I didn't try to be someone I wasn't. I wore a simple black dress, my hair down. I looked like me, just a more confident, steadier version. The gallery was crowded. I saw my photos hanging on the white walls, framed and lit beautifully. They looked professional. They belonged there. I stood apart, watching people stop in front of them. I saw a woman smile at the picture of Pip in the mist. A man leaned in close to study the intricate details of the lichen forest. And then I saw it. The co-architect had a small gold sticker next to it. A crowd was gathered around it. I heard snippets of conversation. So powerful, the scale of it, the emotion in it. It's not just a pet picture. Who is this Charlotte O'Brien? I didn't introduce myself to anyone. I didn't need to. The recognition I craved wasn't from them. It was from myself. I had needed to know that the new world I was building inside myself had merit, had beauty in the eyes of others. And now I knew. I left before the awards were announced formally. I didn't need a certificate. The validation was in the hanging of the photos, in the quiet appreciation of strangers. I drove home, the Colorado night sky vast and starry above me. The house was quiet when I entered. Pip rustled in his cage, waiting for his bedtime treat. I went to him and scooped him up, holding his warm, soft body against me. "We did it," I whispered into his fur. "We're architects." I was no longer just healing. I had mastered the art of my own recovery. The blueprint was complete. And now, I was living in it. Happiness, I was learning, was not a final destination. It wasn't a house you built and then lived in forever. It was a weather system. Some days were clear and sunny, like the day of the gallery showing. Others were overcast with the lingering grief of what was lost. But the violent storms had passed. The climate of my life had fundamentally changed. I was no longer just surviving the elements. I was studying them, appreciating their variety, knowing that the sun would always return. My life had a new rhythm, a satisfying cadence built around my work, my hikes with Pip, and the quiet solitude of my home, which was now truly, completely mine. The divorce decree was a PDF file on my laptop, a cold digital full stop. Robert was a ghost who had finally, blessedly, stopped rattling his chains. He'd moved to another state with Sarah. The news had come through my lawyer, and I'd felt nothing. Not vindication, not anger. Just a mild, distant curiosity, as if hearing about an acquaintance from long ago. This new, steady happiness was a state of being I was deeply protective of. I wasn't looking for anything, or anyone, to disrupt it. My heart was a finished building, and I was its sole occupant and caretaker. The thought of adding a new wing, of doing renovations for a partner, felt exhausting and wholly unnecessary. Which is why I was entirely unprepared for the collision. It was a Tuesday. Pip had been listless for a day, eating less, his usually frantic nose twitching subdued. The panic I felt was immediate and primal. He was my co-pilot, my talisman. I couldn't lose him. I found the number for the closest veterinary clinic with an urgent care slot and bundled him into his carrier, my hands shaking. The clinic was a clean, bright place that smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. I filled out the forms, my handwriting a frantic scrawl. Pip O'Brien. I gave him my name. Of course I did. We were led to an examination room, all sterile stainless steel and cheerful posters about parasite prevention. I unzipped the top of his carrier and stroked his head, whispering nonsense reassurances to him and to myself. The door opened. "Good morning, I'm Dr. Evans," a calm, warm voice said. I looked up, and the world, my carefully constructed, perfectly balanced world, tilted on its axis. He wasn't movie star handsome. His attractiveness was in his solidness. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, and hair that was a little too long and unruly for a medical professional. He had the build of a man who used his hands for more than typing. Broad shoulders, capable-looking hands that were currently scrolling through Pip's chart on a tablet. But it was his presence that undid me. The room, which had felt cold and clinical, suddenly felt grounded. He had a stillness to him, a lack of the frantic energy that usually permeated places like this. "So, this is Pip," he said, smiling as he looked from the tablet to the carrier. He didn't look at me yet. His entire focus was on his patient. I was instantly, irrationally grateful for this. "Yes," I managed, my voice coming out as a croak. "He's just not himself." Dr. Evans, the veterinarian for her newly adopted dog, the randomized parameter whispered in my mind. Set the tablet down and approached. He didn't just grab Pip. He held out a finger for Pip to sniff first. "Hey there, little man. Not feeling so great?" His voice was gentle, deep. He lifted Pip out with a practiced ease that was incredibly gentle. He placed him on the examination table, his hands moving over Pip's body with a confident, soothing touch, checking his ears, his teeth, palpating his abdomen. I stood there, frozen, watching this competent, kind man examine my rabbit. My heart was doing something absurd. It wasn't pounding with fear anymore. It was fluttering. It was a sensation I hadn't felt in over a decade. It was terrifying. He murmured, mostly to himself. A bit of ghee stasis, I think. Pretty common in bunnies when they're stressed. Has anything changed in his routine lately? I almost laughed. Has anything changed? No, not really. It was the biggest lie I'd told in years. He glanced at me then, and his eyes held mine for a second. They were a warm hazel color. He had a tiny scar through his left eyebrow. I noticed it with absurd clarity. He smiled, a small, understanding smile that seemed to suggest he knew I was lying but wouldn't press it. "Well, let's get some critical care food into him and some meds to get his gut moving. He should be just fine." The relief was so potent it made me lightheaded. Pip was going to be okay. And this man was... He showed me how to syringe feed the critical care, his hand gently guiding mine. Like this, slow and steady. You don't want him to aspirate. Our fingers didn't touch, but the proximity was electric. I could smell a faint, clean scent of soap and, inexplicably, sawdust. "You're good at this," he said, his voice low. "A natural." "I'm an architectural draftsman," I blurted out, for no reason whatsoever. "I'm good with precise movements." He looked amused. "Well, that explains it. This is just biological drafting." He finished the administration and handed me a bottle of medication. "This, twice a day, and keep him warm and quiet." I nodded, stuffing everything into my bag, my mind racing. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to ask him about the sawdust smell. I wanted to ask him about the scar on his eyebrow. I wanted to know everything. "Thank you, Dr. Evans," I said, my voice formal, stupid. "Ben," he said. "Call me Ben." He scritched Pip between the ears. "Feel better, little guy." Then he looked back at me. "Call if you have any concerns. Day or night." The numbers on the paperwork, day or night. The words hung in the air between us. It was a professional offer. But my newly repaired heart, the one I thought was closed for business, did a wild, hopeful somersault. I paid at the front desk, my hands still unsteady. I clutched Pip's carrier to my chest like a shield. As I pushed the door open to leave, I risked one glance back down the hallway. He was standing in the doorframe of another exam room, talking to a technician. but he was looking right at me. And he offered a small, quick smile before turning back to his work. The Colorado sun outside was blinding. I buckled Pip's carrier into the passenger seat and got in the car. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, not starting the engine. My life had been a perfectly composed photograph. The framing was right, the light was perfect, the subject was clear and solitary. And then, out of nowhere, a new element had wandered into the frame. Like any process. Something solid and kind and smelling of sawdust. It disrupted the entire composition. It shouldn't have worked. And yet, somehow, the picture felt more interesting, more alive. I looked over at Pip, who was already looking more alert, nibbling on a piece of hay. "What was that?" I whispered to him. He just twitched his nose, as if to say, "You tell me." I started the car. The steady, familiar world I had built was still there, but it now had a hairline fracture, a tiny, almost invisible fissure where something new, something entirely unforeseen had managed to slip in. I was terrified. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I was intrigued. The world did not magically realign after meeting Ben. Pip recovered with the grumpy dignity of a convalescent king, and my life settled back into its new, comfortable rhythm. But the fissure remained. A tiny hairline crack in my well-ordered world through which a beam of unexpected light had poured. I found myself thinking about the vet with the kind hands and the sawdust smell at the most inopportune times, while drafting a bathroom layout, while washing dishes, while watching Pip meticulously rearrange the hay in his cage. A week after the vet visit, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text was polite, professional, and sent my heart into a frantic tap dance against my ribs. "Hi Charlotte, it's Ben Evans from Alpine Animal Care. Just checking in on Pip. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen. This was standard practice, right? Follow-up care. Good customer service. It didn't mean anything. I typed back, my thumbs clumsy. "Hi Ben, Pip is back to his imperious self. Thank you again for your help." I added a rabbit emoji for good measure. It felt ridiculously forward. 3 dots appeared. Then, imperious. I like that. Glad to hear it. A pause. More dots. This is unprofessional, but I was wondering if you'd like to get a coffee sometime. There's a great place near the clinic that allows well-behaved, imperious rabbits on the patio. I nearly dropped the phone. The directness of it, the gentle humor, the inclusion of Pippet was a masterstroke. This was no longer a professional follow-up. This was a collision course, and he was steering. The old me, the one who built walls instead of alcoves, would have found an excuse. The new me, the one who submitted photos to galleries and attempted breakdancing, looked over at Pip, who was currently attempting to tip over his food bowl for the sheer drama of it. "I think his schedule is clear," I typed back, a boldness I didn't recognize flowing through me. And that's how, on a brilliantly sunny Saturday, I found myself sitting at a wrought iron table on a bustling patio, a latte cooling in front of me and Pip in his travel cage under the table, nibbling a piece of carrot I brought as a bribe for good behavior. I saw Ben before he saw me. He was walking up the street, not in his scrubs, but in dark jeans and a worn, soft-looking flannel shirt. He moved with the same easy confidence he had in the clinic. He scanned the patio, his eyes finding me, and a smile broke across his face that was entirely unprofessional and completely wonderful. "You made it," he said, sliding into the chair opposite me. "And the patient seems to be thriving. The patient is plotting world domination, but yes, he's medically sound," I said, and was rewarded with a warm, genuine laugh. The conversation was not a clumsy first-date interview. It was easy. It flowed. We talked about our jobs, the precision of my drafting, the controlled chaos of his clinic. We talked about Colorado, our shared love for the mountains. He asked about my photography, and I told him about the gallery show, the feeling of seeing my work on a wall. He listened, really listened, his focus entirely on me. Then I remembered the randomized trait. Positive, perprut, chi, IHD-DNIE, chi-RI, builds custom furniture as a hobby. "You mentioned sawdust at the clinic," I ventured. "Do you woodwork?" His face lit up. "You have a good nose." "Yeah, it's my therapy. After a day of, well, sometimes not great outcomes, there's something deeply satisfying about working with wood." It's predictable. You put in the work, you follow the steps, and you get something solid and beautiful at the end. Right now, I'm building a dining table out of reclaimed barn wood for my sister, an architectural draftsman and a furniture builder. We spoke the same language of lines, joinery, and creation. The coincidence was so perfect it felt fated. The coffee stretched into a walk around the farmer's market that was spilling out from the town square. We wandered past stalls overflowing with produce, artisanal cheeses, and handmade crafts. It was the randomized Yen THDC, a product forces, and Chi PHDCCU, time market exploring, but better. It was alive with color and sound. We weren't just exploring, we were building a shared experience, one moment at a time. He pointed out a particularly beautiful knife handle made of elk antler. I dragged him over to a stall selling vintage postcards of Colorado landscapes. We bought a bag of fresh apples and ate them as we walked, Pip attracting a small crowd of admirers in his backpack. It was during a pause by a stall selling hand-thrown pottery that the conversation turned more serious. We were looking at a beautiful glazed bowl, its colors the deep blue and green of a mountain lake. "It's funny," he said, his voice quieter. "Creating things. It's how I process the world. I think it's why I became a vet. It's a different kind of fixing, of making things whole again." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the kindness in his eyes, but also the shadows of the hard days he'd mentioned. I saw a strength that wasn't hard, but resilient. I saw a man who understood repair, both in animals and in wood, and, perhaps, in people. Without thinking, driven by a need for honesty that this man seemed to inspire, I said, "I'm recently divorced." The words hung in the air between us, a stark contrast to the cheerful market noise. He didn't flinch, he didn't look away. He just nodded, his gaze steady. "I know," he said softly. "I mean, I didn't know. But I saw it. In your eyes that day at the clinic. It's a specific kind of rebuilding look." Tears pricked at my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of being seen. Truly seen. He hadn't seen a victim or a sad divorcee. He'd seen a builder, a rebuilder. "It's a work in progress," I said, my voice thick. "The best projects always are," he replied, and his smile was a promise. We walked back to our cars as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The air was cool, and Pip was asleep in his pack, exhausted from his grand day out. We stopped by my car. The easy conversation of the afternoon settled into a comfortable, charged silence. "I had a really nice time today, Charlotte," he said, his hands in his pockets. "Me too, Ben." He didn't try to kiss me. He just reached out and gently squeezed my hand. His palm was warm and rough against mine, a working hand, a healing hand. "Can I call you?" he asked. "Maybe we could go on a proper hike next time, without the patio crowd." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it with every rebuilt piece of my heart. I drove home, the ghost of his handhold still warm on mine. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like a place waiting for a new story. I let Pip out into his cage, and he immediately flopped over in a contented heap. I walked to my drafting table, to the blueprint of my alcove. It was nearly finished in reality, the shelves installed, the window seat cushion ordered. It was perfect. It was mine. But as I looked at the lines I had drawn, I realized something. A good architect always leaves room for future expansion, for unforeseen additions, for the possibility that the initial design, while perfect for its time, might one day be enhanced by a new wing. I hadn't just had a coffee date. I had been handed a new set of blueprints. They were unfinished, full of possibility and unknown variables. And for the first time, the thought of a new construction project didn't terrify me. It thrilled me. The blueprint for the new wing wasn't just a metaphor anymore. It was a set of actual physical plans, spread across the large dining table that Ben had built. Our table. From the reclaimed barnwood he'd told me about on our first date. Its surface was scarred, beautiful, and solid, a perfect testament to the beauty of things that had been broken and remade into something stronger. The final, randomized parameters of my new life had fallen into place with a sense of rightness that still took my breath away. Pauses. One girl. Her name was Maya, Ben's 8-year-old daughter from a previous marriage that had ended not in betrayal, but in a quiet mutual drifting apart. She had her father's kind eyes and a fierce, curious spirit that reminded me of my own. POCA, new house, same state. We hadn't moved far. We'd bought a place together, a ranch-style house on the outskirts of Boulder with a big backyard for Pip and a spare room for Maya. But it needed work, of course it did. We wouldn't have had it any other way. The house was filled with the sounds of our life now. The low murmur of Ben in his workshop in the garage, sanding a new bookshelf. The pop song Maya was playing in her room, the lyrics half sung, half shouted. The soft thump of Pip's feet as he raced through the hallway, his kingdom vastly expanded. I was in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on dinner. The randomized NEC is Axdia had been failed baking, but we'd graduated from failure to a comfortable, shared competence. Tonight, it was lasagna, a collaborative effort. Ben had made the sauce, I had layered the noodles, Maya had sprinkled the cheese with a heavy hand. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air, a stark, beautiful contrast to the sterile silence of my old home. This wasn't just dinner, it was a ritual. A daily reaffirmation of the family we were building, brick by brick, meal by meal. Maya came skidding into the kitchen, her socks sliding on the hardwood. "Is it ready?" "I'm starving." "5 more minutes," I said, smiling. "Set the table?" She nodded, grabbing plates from the cupboard with a clatter that would have once made me wince. Now, it was just the sound of Maya. Ben walked in, wiping his hands on a rag that smelled of sawdust and lemon oil. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Smells incredible," he murmured into my neck, sending a familiar, happy shiver down my spine. He looked over at the table Maya was setting. "She used the good plates," he observed. "We're a good plate kind of family," I said, and the truth of the statement settled deep into my bones. We sat down to eat, the three of us. The conversation was a lively, chaotic mess. Maya recounted every detail of her friend's hamster's alleged escape adventure. Ben talked about a difficult surgery he performed that day, a dog that was going to be okay because of his skill. I told them about a client's request for a house shaped like a spaceship. No, seriously. We laughed, we passed the garlic bread. Our knees touched under the table that Ben had built. This was it. This was the destination I never knew I was searching for. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real, messy, beautiful beginning. It wasn't about erasing the past. The scar of Robert's betrayal was still there, a part of my personal topography. But it was like the reclaimed wood of our table, a flaw that no longer defined the structure, but simply testified to its history and its strength. After dinner, while Ben wrestled Maya into the bath, I went outside onto the back porch. The Colorado air was cool and clean. The sky was a deep, velvety blue, the first stars beginning to prick through. Pip hopped out after me, sniffing the evening air. I looked back through the window into our warm, brightly lit home. I saw Ben, laughing as he pretended Maya's rubber duck was attacking him. I saw the drawings Maya had made for school stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. I saw my camera bag sitting by the door, ready for our next hike. I had built a life, not from a place of fear or lack, but from a place of wholeness. I had chosen a partner who wasn't my other half, because I was already whole. He was my co-architect, my fellow builder, and together we were building a world for this amazing, resilient little girl. The back door slid open and Ben stepped out, handing me a mug of tea. "She's down for the count." Storybook did its job. He slipped his arm around me, and I leaned into his solid, steady warmth. "It's a good life, Ben," I said softly, the words inadequate for the swell of emotion in my chest. He kissed my temple. "It's our life, Charlotte. We built it well." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Pip sat between us, a silent, furry guardian of our peace. The upgrade was complete. The story hadn't ended with the loss of one family, it had begun with the creation of another. I had been broken down to my foundation. And from that raw, exposed surface, I had drafted a new plan, stronger and more beautiful than anything that had come before. I was no longer just Charlotte, the architectural draftsman. I was Charlotte, the builder of a life. And the view from here was breathtaking.